Tonight, we're going to be looking at the Psalms from the perspective of the crucible of pain. One of the things that I like to tell about the Psalms, for me, and I want you to think about how it connects with you. I didn't really appreciate the power of the Psalms until my oldest uncle was dying with cancer. And his name was Leonard McClane, and I really looked up to Leonard because as I was growing up, he preached full-time in two places, Hope, Arkansas and Kirby, Arkansas. And he had a radio program. He published a lot of little booklets. And so as I was growing up, I was just amazed. Plus another thing, and this probably had more influence on me than I realized over the years, because I remember when we go visit them in Arkansas, he had a wood shop in the backyard, and every time we'd go visit, and I can remember when I was just real small, I would run out in his wood shop and see what he was making, and I thought it was so neat to see all those tools laying around and all those shavings everywhere. That was just the neatest thing for me. But when Leonard was dying with cancer, I got to talk to him a couple months before he passed away, and he told me that he would spend his day, and he had pancreatic cancer, so that his back was, he had a lot of pain. And he said the only way he could stand the pain was get in a chair and back up against the wood stove, just as close as he could get. And it would be turned up as hot as it could be. And he said he'd just sit there and bake the pain away. Like, wow. And I said, well, what do you do while you're sitting there? He said, well, God and I meet in the Psalms. So the last days of his life, for several months, every day, he was just in the Psalms. And that opened my eyes up to thinking about, if I had a few months left to live, how would I view the Psalms? How would they speak to me? What is in and here's the question that I didn't ask him, but it made me ask, what was in the Psalms that drove him there? He obviously knew the Word of God, but there was something he knew about the Psalms that drove him there in his last days. And part of it is this whole concept of the crucible of pain. David and some of the other writers in the Psalms, when you read through them, you have no doubt that there's been a lot of pain in their life. I want to start out with looking at two passages in Psalm 38 that set the stage for it. In Psalm 38:7, my back is filled with searing pain. There is no health in my body. And I thought, boy, my uncle could really identify with that one. And then Psalm 38:17, for I'm about to fall and my pain is ever with me. Now what you discover, and not only just in your own life, but in the Psalms, you discover there are about three kinds of pain. Maybe more, but three basic kinds. One, of course, is physical. The other is emotional. And the other one is kind of like mental anguish, gives you pain. And the psalmist will experience all three of those in different ways. And it's almost like they're on every page. And so the crucible of pain is just all over the book of Psalms. So, for I'm about to fall and my pain is ever with me. I want to start off with some lessons from the Psalms about pain before we dive into one of the particular Psalms to look at the movement of what David does with that Psalm and how he processes his pain. Which I didn't think about saying this, but this is an important point. Think about how being a Christian will help us process pain differently from a non-Christian. See, if we hold the view that the Christian has a different kind of life, then the next thing that would follow, if you're talking about the crucible of pain, is the Christian then has a unique dimension on pain and a unique way of processing it that non-Christians don't have. And when you say that, you understand some things you're not saying. You're not saying that pain is irrelevant, by no means. You're not even trying to deny that it's there, not by any means. But what you are saying is there is a unique perspective that you can bring to that experience that the non-Christian doesn't have. And if we have time tonight and I can think about it, I want to jump over to 2 Corinthians 4 and look at some perspectives that Paul has that we can even add on top of the book of Psalms. Okay, let's look at a few of these, and you may want to have a comment as we talk about them. First, the crucible of pain makes our dependence on God come to the forefront. And think about why that is true. Many, many times, and I'm thinking again, it could be physical pain, emotional, or mental anguish. Many, 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 many times, the source of that pain is outside of you, or it is such that you cannot control it. Now, the only way you can is by taking pain medication sometimes, but the source of pain, usually, you don't have the option of saying, okay, I'm ready for pain now, I can, let's go with it, I can take it, or turn the button off, I'm done with it. We don't have control over that. And because of that, we begin to realize that our dependence on God comes to the forefront there because we're asking for help. We need help. Now, here's the other thing with this. And when I say this, you're going to know this before I even talk about that there's even empirical evidence to back all this up. But people are most open to God when life is most painful. And see, and think about that. What do you suppose is the reason for that? If you just make the statement, people are most open to God when there's a lot of pain in their life. What, say again? Okay, at probably a pretty primary level, they're expecting God to do something and take it away. Okay. And what's another reason maybe? Why do you think people are most open to God when life is most painful? Okay, they're desperate. Mm-hmm. So they're desperate. All of a sudden, life isn't normal like it's been. So at that moment, they're kind of all options are now open, which means they're open to God. They may not know it at the time that much, but they're now open, whereas before they were closed. So it's interesting how our dependence on God comes to the forefront. Boy, does it ever. Chronic pain makes us aware of how little we control our health. And in the book of Psalms, there are interesting metaphors used to talk about chronic pain that won't go away. And I know perhaps every one of you sitting here tonight, listen to this lesson, you've had your own version of chronic pain that won't go away. That kind of experience too makes you very much aware that you don't have the power within yourself to make it go away. Searing pain has the power to constrict our world around us. And I've noticed that this is true, and all of us to a certain measure experience this. And in Psalm 22, the psalmist will talk about this. He's talking about his painful experiences, and I wish we knew a little bit more of his circumstances, because he just throws out so many metaphors to talk about what he's going through. You're not really quite sure what the specific is, but boy, is it picturesque. And he says he's in pain, he's going through all these troubles and agony and all this, and at one point he says, it's like the bulls of Bashan encircle me. Now can you imagine? Just imagine what that metaphor is about. If you're out in the field and all of a sudden a bunch of bulls encircle you. And see, that's a neat metaphor too of talking about how the pain, searing pain that's really, really painful, has a way of just closing your world in on you. And maybe you've experienced that and you have seen it in other people. And pain has that power. pain itself and praying for its release can wear us out. Have you ever noticed how ongoing pain just saps you of energy, just from a practical perspective? It just, and I've had several, let's see. What was it a person told me a few years ago? I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I'm sick and tired of praying and still being sick and tired. So just they had a big long explanation using sick and tired, because it can wear you out, you know, and we've all been there. And sometimes, and boy, the psalmist, we're not going to have time to have, and I've mentioned this several times in some of our lessons, we're not going to have the time to go through the Psalms and look at this topic, but the absence or the silence of God that he notices. It's all over the place. Sometimes chronic pain makes us aware of the absence or silence of God with regard to our pleas for relief. Remember we talked a little bit about, we had one lesson on faithful lament, how important it is to be able to tell God what you're feeling. Part of that, David in the Psalms laments the fact that he thinks God is absent and not listening to him. On one occasion he says, "Why don't you wake up and listen to me?" I thought, I have never said that in a prayer before. Not sure I want to, but David felt like he could. You know, where are you, God? Wake up, pay attention, I need your help. David was very forceful with that. And sometimes chronic pain makes people wonder, where is God? Now, here, from a counseling perspective, here's what I've discovered. When people go through this struggling with the absence and silence of God, sometimes they interpret it wrong. I've had people come in my office thinking, there's something wrong with me, I've lost my faith. Like, oh, and of course you let them process it and talk about it, but I said, well, let's back the truck up and let's take this from another perspective. I don't think it's a loss of faith. You're faithfully lamenting the fact that God's not answering you like you think he ought to. And that's not having no faith. That's faith wondering. That's faith trying to figure it out. So there's a big difference. And sometimes people have a hard time making that distinction. The times of trouble and pain, both physical and emotional, drive us to seek the face of God to whom we can plead for delivery. And the Psalms are very clear on this. I wish that I had the 100% foolproof formula to give you so that every time you pleaded to God for delivery, it would happen. And if I had that, I could get pretty rich, couldn't I? We don't know when and where and why. Sometimes God does deliver, and sometimes he doesn't. You just have to live with it. It's hard to accept. And sometimes, and again, there are individuals who take that as their problem. That if I were just the Christian I ought to be, God would have delivered me from this. I'm like, really? Do you hear what you're telling yourself? So people haven't thought through some of these responses. And God understands how our hearts can be racked with pain and broken. If there's anything that the Psalms teaches us about God, is that God hears and God listens and God cares. And maybe we need to tell each other that over and over and over. No matter how painful life gets, God hears and God listens and he notices and God cares. If we didn't really believe that, we'd just close up shop and go home. I mean, that kind of gets right to the core of it, doesn't it? And God is our sure salvation and deliverance. And the psalmist will say this over and over and over. He is certain that God is there. He's also certain that God can deliver him if God would. There's sometimes you know, God, why aren't you? But he knows God can. And ultimately, God deeply cares about our deep anguish. And I think this is one of the reasons why Well, on my Sunday night class, small group, we're going through the book of Revelation, and we talked about some of in the letters to the 7 churches, even at that early date, if you date Revelation in the 90s, which I do, some people date it earlier, toward the last half of the first century, you've got all kinds of heresies cropping up, even at an early date. One of them was the idea that Jesus didn't come in the flesh. And so I posed the question to my group. I said, well, why is that such a bad thing? I mean, who cares if Jesus came in the flesh or not? And they're like, whoa, wait, we need to talk about this. And as we started talking about it, Jesus coming in the flesh has a whole lot of implications. And this is just one of them. That God identifies through Jesus with our physical, mental anguish and suffering. That through Jesus, God knows. Jesus put on the suffering face of God for us so that there is an identification. In fact, Paul will use a strange phrase about all this. He'll say, in our suffering is the suffering of Christ made complete. Like, oh, I thought it was the other way around. No, in our suffering, the suffering of Christ is made complete. So that he began his incarnational ministry here on earth with all of its human suffering, but it's completed as he lives and works through us as we go through life. So these are just some basic things about suffering from the Psalms. Yeah, Joe? We know he knows. Yeah, good way of putting it. Yeah.
We already do, but we couldn't put our hands around the fact
that he knows.
I think that's what we really get from him coming, well, among others.
Yeah.
But him being in the flesh and knowing that he went through the same kinds of pains that we go, it makes us feel like, okay, God understands.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
He already did, but now we know.
But now, well, tagging off of what you said, now we have empirical, tangible proof that he knows. Okay. And, I mean, interestingly, that's good because we live in a physical world, don't we? I was so intrigued by this metaphor of a crucible, I wanted to pursue it just a little bit. A crucible, this is a literal crucible, is a ceramic or metal container in which metals or other substances may be melted or subjected to very high temperatures, and of course it's for either purification or formation of other substances when you go through that. But when it's used as a metaphor, look at how it's described. It's a situation of severe trial or in which different elements interact, leading to the creation of something new. And of course, this is Oxford English Dictionary definition. The severe trial, we got that. Or it's in which different elements interact. And I wasn't thinking in terms of natural elements. I was thinking in terms of the elements of a person's life. What parts of us interact when we go through a severe trial? You know, we're spiritual, we're mental, we are an emotional, psychological. There's different ways in which people try to describe the human being, but all parts of us interact when we go through a severe trial, leading to the creation of something new. And boy, is that ever true. And we don't have time this evening to go through this, but that's part of the New Testament's teaching of theodicy. Where is God in suffering? Paul is real clear, and of course so is Jesus. Through suffering, something new comes out of it. It's a new you, if you allow it. And this is why you've heard this old cliche. When people go through severe trial, you have two choices. You can allow it to make you bitter, or you can allow it to make you better. I mean, Nothing in between. You're going to get bitter or you're going to get better. And when you're open to this creation of something new through the working of God, you can get better, okay? So the severe trial can indeed be something that works on and in and through you to be the work of God. So pain creates anew. It's the crucible in which our character is forged, creating a new self that sees, understands, and embraces complete dependence upon God. And that's what severe trials can do. And even when the pain does not go away, God is still there and shares the pain with us. A good friend of mine named Scott, who used to live up in Rochester, Michigan, helped me experience the meaning of that last point. Scott went into the hospital for they thought was going to be a routine colon surgery. 8 surgeries later, they were still working on his colon. And when it got so bad, they finally had to call in one of the nation's leading colon experts, and they decided that the doctors before had messed it up so bad that there wasn't anything they could do to save the colon. No. Well, in fact, the last doctor and surgeon that worked on him tried to get him to sue the other doctors, so I don't know all went on behind that. But it was obvious that the previous doctors had just loused it up. And he ended up with, what's a colonostomy that you wear outside your body? Yeah. And for a while, well, first of all, Scott, the last time he went into surgery, he almost didn't pull out. And here's a young man in his early 30s. When he woke up, he was very bitter because he knew what had happened. And he said, I just want to die. I said, well, Scott, I'm here for you. And when he finally went home, he went through some depression. And I went over to visit him one day. He said, I can't even pray to God. I said, well, God knows that. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. I said, on days when I come by to visit with you, and he had been preaching, and his goal was to go into full-time preaching. Well, during this time, he couldn't teach or preach, so he's in his apartment while his wife's working. He said, well, when you come over, would you just sit with me? I said, I'll be glad to do that. I said, I'll do one better. I said, I will pray on your behalf, and I will ask God to let me be your punching bag. So I was there for Scott, and it was amazing because there are days when he went through a lot of dark times. But it's pretty heart-wrenching too. But when you're there for someone going through that kind of pain, I became for Scott, and later on he told me this, I became for Scott the tangible proof that there was still life and there was still a God. Because in his own heart and mind, he couldn't grab a hold of that. And sometimes I wonder if all of us in certain situations that's what we are to other people, we don't know it. And I would think that we might need to take more serious look at our example in front of other people, because we may be mediating the very gospel, good news, and presence of God in Christ in ways to other people we never dreamed of. And so anyway, God is still there and he shares the pain with us. And that's something people need to hear, because they assume when pain comes, God's not there and he doesn't care. Our God is a pain-embracing God who knew of the agony of allowing his son to be crucified. And so that's the New Testament kind of statement on it. Turn to Psalm 69 now, because in the time that we have, I want to sort of pursue this movement in Psalm 69 of what pain looks like and how the psalmist is going to weave all around with it and try to deal with it in ways that are healthy as he processes it. In fact, I think as I was pulling some of the ideas for this lesson together, Nancy and I one evening after we had eaten, we were sitting in the living room talking about this, and I said, there are individuals who think that when you have a negative feeling, or if you're angry, that anger in and of itself is sin. Not only that, but you take it to another step. There are people who believe that conflict is wrong and is a sin. When people have conflict. Now, I will grant you that many of us didn't grow up with a good model of conflict resolution. I grant you that. But conflict in and of itself is not sin. We just don't know how sometimes to process those negative things. Well, in Psalm 69, the psalmist is going to process some of this. Look at the pain of rejection and the physical condition he's going to talk about. Save me, O God. Now, and just think about the metaphors and how he would feel. Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. Just recently, where was it? I met somebody that I knew, and we were just kind of in passing. I was going this way, and they were going that way. And I said, how's it going? And the person's response is, I'm up to here with water. Then they kept on walking. When somebody says that, we understand that metaphor, don't we? Well, here he says, the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the miry depths where there's no foothold. I've come into the deep waters. The floods engulf me. I am worn out, calling for help. My throat is parched. My eyes fail, looking for my God. And then he describes what probably is some of his agony here. Those who hate me without reason outnumber the hairs of my head. Now that's a lot of enemies. And again, I think he's throwing out a metaphor here, and I don't think he means to be literal, but still he's trying to tell you he's got a lot of people after him that hate him. Many are my enemies without cause. Those who seek to destroy me, I'm forced to restore what I did not steal. And I've often wondered, what is that a reference to? He doesn't tell us. So there's some stuff going on here with people that he considers his enemies that have forced him to do some things he don't want, and they're really out to get him. I mean, it's just, it is not a pretty picture at all. But he's talking about all of the stuff that he's experiencing through rejection and through what he's going through. Look at verse 5. You know my folly, O God, my guilt is not hidden from you. Now I want to ask this question. Given that this chapter is sort of looking at the experience of pain and sort of looking at his ways of describing it and how to respond to it, why in the world would he throw in verse 5? How does that fit into the big picture? What would your guess be? Why is that verse in there?
Okay, I've said some things I shouldn't have said in previous verses. It says this is foolishness and on your part, God, because you can handle it.
Exactly, and I think with that he's trying to say, I'm not squeaky clean. I know these guys are after him and got all these problems I'm experiencing. I'm not perfect, and God, you know that. Think of all the ways in the Psalms where he will say, God made me and he knows me through and through. And here he realizes, I can't pull anything over on God. I'm not perfect. Here I am squealing about all this stuff. I'm not perfect.
My eyeballs and the water, there's no good footing and all this. And he says, that's not really the way that it is. God, you understand. You understand me.
Mm-hmm. You know my folly, O God. My guilt is not hidden from you. And some.
I'm not telling you anything you don't already.
Okay. Yeah, it has that.
I'm not telling you, you already know.
Yeah, it has that flavor, doesn't it? So I just wanted you to be aware that what he's trying to do with that verse, because if you're not careful, you're reading down through and boom, that verse hits you in the face. You're like, wow, why is that one there? Now, he then goes on to say, in verse 6, may those who hope in you not be disgraced because of me, O Lord God Almighty. May those who seek you not be put to shame because of the God of Israel. It's interesting here that, let me back up a minute. The Old Testament world was a world that put high priority on honor, and shame was really shameful in the ancient world. It's called honor and shame culture, and we're kind of aware of it with things like if you watch movies like World War II movies, and you'll see Japanese soldiers taking their life, like suicide bombers, or the kamikaze pilots, or they're in battle, and instead of, when we see this in the Old Testament too, instead of dying at the hands of your enemy, you take your own life. Now we're like, whoa. Well, in honor and shame culture, it's much more honorable to die at your own hands than to die at the hand of your enemies and have them disgrace your body. And that was just the way of their thinking. And there are many other things in the Old and New Testament that are really deeply rooted in the idea of honor and shame culture. Yes, perfect example. Mm-hmm. So here's what's interesting. May those who hope in you not be disgraced because of me. And apparently, what I get by this is he knows people are watching him as he's going through this, and he doesn't want other people, he doesn't want their hope in God to be disgraced just because of the way he's handling himself. He really wants his example to be such that people will be aware of where God is in all of this. For example, may those who seek you not be put to shame because of me, O God of Israel. So he's very concerned about his witness, his example, what he's going through when people look at him. For I endure scorn for your sake, and shame covers my face. Well, it's the shame from other people that are heaping on him. I'm a stranger to my brothers, an alien to my mother's sons. For zeal your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you fall on me. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Quote in the Gospel of John, in chapter 2, the early episode, what is it, John 2:17, the early episode of the tables being overturned, comes out of this particular psalm. So that, let's think about this a moment. Why would Jesus in that episode quote this passage? Well, notice that it's coming out of a passage here that deals with guilt and shame. When Jesus was embarking on his ministry, he recognized that there are a lot of people who had wrong ideas about religion. And he wanted people to sit up and take notice about what the priorities were. And he says, the zeal for your house consumes me, and the insults of those who insult you follow me. So in one sense, Jesus was taking all of the bad stuff, and his zeal for what the house of God was supposed to be, a house of prayer, remember what he says, not a den of thieves. And so he appropriates that verse for it. When I weep and fast, I must endure scorn. When I put on sackcloth, people make sport of me. And those who sit at the gate mock me, and I am the song of the drunkards. Well, he's really painting a poor, pitiful me picture, isn't he? And of course, and think about this, in his role, David is king. Well, when the king begins to show some vulnerability, there are some people who can't handle that. Now, in the next section, this is verse 13, David turns to the Lord. But I pray to you, O Lord, in the time of your favor. In your great love, O God, answer me with your sure salvation. This is one of the things that amazes me through all of David's pain in the book of Psalms. No matter how bad things get, he always sees God as one who has great love. He is the great God of the universe. He is the God of Israel who cares for his people and will deliver. David never doubts the character of God. In verse 14, rescue me from the mire. Remember, he said way back in verse 2, I'm in these miry depths. Rescue me from the mire. Do not let me sink. Deliver me from those who hate me, from the deep waters. Deliver me from those who hate me. So there's a specific deliverance that he's asking for, and it's undoubtedly specific people he has in mind, though he doesn't name them here. And then he goes back to his original, some of the original metaphors that he used. Do not let the floodwaters engulf me, or the depths swallow me up, or the pit close its mouth over me. So see, these are pleas for God's help. Remember, we had a lesson where we talked about how that the psalmists expect God to respond to their pleas. The Psalms are filled with pleas. P-L-E-A-S, pleas. And in those pleas, they're saying, please help me. Two different kind of pleas there. Now, in verse, so these are metaphors for overwhelming dimensions of problems and pain. Don't let that happen. And in verse 17, or 16, answer me, God, O Lord, out of the goodness of your love and your great mercy, turn to me. One thing that's interesting in the book of Psalms, and not just in Psalms, but especially in Psalms, there is a tremendous amount of emphasis on the goodness of God, his love, and his mercy. And in times of trouble, the psalmist calls out for God for those very things. Do not hide your face from your servant. Answer me quickly, for I'm in trouble. Don't hide your face from me. And then verse 18, come near and rescue me. Redeem me because of my foes. So this is the idea of God's nearness and God's caring involvement. Come near and rescue me. Now, this would be something, this is one of the many things, and as you have read through the Old Testament, I'm sure you've picked up on this is one of the many things in the Old Testament of where God superintends and goes way beyond the other idols of the pagan nations. The pagan nations never thought of their gods and goddesses as being near, as caring, and being involved in their life. That traditionally wasn't thought of. Oh yeah. In fact, and this is interesting in the early Christian age, 1st and 2nd century, one of the things that you find out in some of the extant pagan literature is that they have all the, and of course, and this is a whole other topic, even some of the Christians pick up on this, but there's certain incantations that if in words and things you would say, that if you could say them just right with the right sacrifice, it's sort of like you can fly beneath the radar and the gods and goddesses won't notice you. And like you're kind of keeping them appeased, kind of at arm's length, and they'll leave you alone and you can just live your life. Because if you ever attracted their attention, it was bad news. So this whole view of God is unique and different from the ancient world. Verses 19 through 21. You know how I'm scorned, disgraced, and shamed. All my enemies are before you. Scorn has broken my heart and has left me helpless. I looked for sympathy, but there was none. For comforters, but I found none. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. Where does that come from? See, this is a Christological foreshadowing. Matthew 27:34. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. So it's just a very bitter kind of thing. So what is gall? Well, it's used in the Septuagint, a translation in the Hebrew Psalms 69:21 is Rosh. It foretells sufferings of our Lord. The drink that offered to Jesus was vinegar made of light wine rendered acid, the common drink of Roman soldiers, mingled with gall, or according to Mark, mingled with myrrh. And apparently it didn't taste good. And it was very acidic, and it was terrible. Both expressions mean the same thing, namely that the vinegar was made bitter by the infusion of wormwood or some other bitter substance, usually given according to a merciful custom, as an anodyne to those who were crucified to render them insensible to pain. One writer said this, "Our Lord, knowing this, refuses to drink it. He would take nothing to cloud his faculties or blunt the pain of dying. He chooses to suffer every element of woe in the bitter cup of agony given him by the Father." This raised a question. And I don't know if you thought about it. You probably have if you've watched family members die. As you come to the end of your life, how alert do you want to be? Interesting question. How much do you want to be aware of as you're dying? Do you want to be aware of your last breath or not? People have to face that. And if this statement is true, the Lord wanted to experience all of the pain, and he chose to be aware of that. And there are dynamics of that, of course, I think go beyond comprehension.
In conjunction with that, this may be just kind of a sidebar. Of all of the ones that you have been with over the years that have died, how many have you seen die in agony?
How many have I seen? A few.
Very few.
Very few. A few.
Most people, it's a very peaceful transition.
Yeah, there's been, well, let's see. If I were to put a number on it, because it's a neat question, I bet I could say only about 3 or 4 through the years. Because you're right, most of them are on morphine or some other pain-killing thing.
Or asleep.
Yeah, or say they just die in their sleep, yeah. Okay. My thing's not going forward. I'm stuck. Okay. Well, let's continue on. That's why I always have plan B, just in case. Verses, and just for a moment, verses 22 through 28. This is the section that helps Psalm 69 qualify as what we call the imprecatory Psalms. And it's a little interesting because it invokes judgment, calamity, or curses upon one's enemies or those perceived as the enemies of God. And in the Psalms, when those kind of Psalms are written, the psalmists always think, their perception is, they're doing the right thing and they're stepping up and they're taking God's side. And that's how they view it. There is a unique Christian dimension to this in that Jesus goes a step further. That instead of praying imprecatory prayers against your enemies, which the psalmist was very much involved in, where does Jesus take it as the next step? What kind of prayer are you to pray for your enemies? Pray for your enemies. Bless them and do not curse. It is, and you could, I mean, there's a lot of things you could think that would be included in that. You could be praying for them to not become your enemy. Be praying for them to be more open to the will of God. A lot of things you can be praying for on their behalf, not against them. The imprecatory Psalms, like I said, the psalmist believes that he's stepping up to the plate and it's sort of like he's pinch hitting for God. And saying, okay, God, these people are against you, I'm against them, just like you are, so let's go get them. And it's kind of interesting. So that these kind of Psalms, though, we would not feel comfortable praying them against our enemies if we see them as expressions of faithfulness on the part of David and the other psalmists, because they feel like they're stepping up with God and doing the right thing by getting rid of his enemies. So that's how they're pursuing that. Well, we will pick up at that point next Wednesday, and appreciate you all being here tonight.